Hello, and welcome to the Dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. In today's video, I want to talk about, I don't know, kind of a wide topic, I guess, as you probably saw in the thumbnail. And what kind of spurred this on is the whole Sweet Baby Inc. Backlash. For anybody who already knows what it is, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I will leave some references to other videos that I think do a great job of summarizing it and go into a lot of depth if you're really curious. But the TLDR is basically somebody noticed that a bunch of video games that were being made all didn't seem to be very popular and all had a few things in common, such as the hiring of an outside firm called Sweet Baby Inc., who do like narrative consulting and story design and stuff like that. And these games weren't particularly popular, so now Sweet Baby's kind of gotten a lot of backlash. Of course, a bunch of gaming journalists. I put those in quotes because gaming journalists basically hate gamers, it seems, and are quite terrible at their craft, honestly. We've also seen them play videos, and if the leaked, Cuphead stuff was any indication, these people can't even master simple things like double jump, so I wouldn't even call them gamers or journalists, really, but that's beside the point. Anyways, the main thing is that basically this company exists to insert diversity and inclusion measures into video games. And on the surface, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that having more LGBT characters and characters of other colors, those aren't bad things. In fact, I think they often make a story better because it adds a lot of realism to it. On the other hand, we also see things like, Black Cleopatra, even though Cleopatra was Greek. We see things like Black Anne Boleyn, even though Anne Boleyn, the Queen of England, was not black, and Black Vikings, etc. In other words, sometimes we go a little too far and insert it to places where it doesn't belong. I don't want white Zulus, and I don't want Black Anne Boleyn either. Let's just keep things reasonable, right? But on the surface, I don't think there's anything wrong with what Sweet Baby Inc. does. The problem is that, like so many of these other people who constantly cloak themselves in virtue and promise to fight for marginalized people or whatever else, they turn out to just be the shadiest and often the most vile people around. And maybe that's why they cloak themselves in virtue, because it's basically just Jungian projection at work, right? And so the worse they are, the more they have to try to behave like they're great people that everybody should admire. And so people have dug up a bunch of information on them. It turns out that, a bunch of them are pretty racist themselves, and they've done things like try to, get the Steam curator who made a list of all their games that they've worked on, tried to get him banned and stuff like that. You'd think that would just be free advertising, but, that's only if you're proud of what you did. If you're, not wanting to be known about, then suddenly you need to attack people who bring your work to light. And, so this has been going on for a while. It's basically the big story right now on the internet. So I'm sure if you're online at all, you've probably noticed, or if you're terminally online like I am, then you're probably rather obsessed with the issue. But that's not really what I want to talk about. And this is a Dungeons and Dragons channel, not a video games channel. Although I will say that I think that what we're watching in a lot of ways is just the decline of great storytelling, especially in the West here, in general. And that includes video games, it includes our TV, our movies, it includes just basically everything. It even includes some of the more recent Wizards of the Coast D&D products, unfortunately. But, I have a rather sour opinion of Wizards of the Coast these days, so you're probably not going to be too surprised by that. But this isn't really about any one of these specific things. Like I said, it's kind of more just the accumulation of bad storytelling in general. And the reason I thought this might be a decent topic to talk about is because as dungeon masters or even players in a Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop role-playing game, we are engaged in a form of storytelling. It's a lot more collaborative than, say, writing a novel where you decide the story and write the narration and everything else from beginning to end. And usually it's a solo project. Sometimes it's more than one person, etc. But for the most part, it's just a solo endeavor. Whereas, the dungeon master and the players are kind of creating a story together. And it's as much improv as it is pre-planning, where players do something and you have to adapt and adjust. And, I've had games where the players need to figure out like who murdered the mayor of the town, and then they just get completely one-track minded and decide it must be the guy's secretary who showed them in to do the murder investigation. And meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, it was the butler. Obviously, it's always the butler players. Come on, what are you thinking? And finally, like 3 hours into this completely wasted time, somebody finally goes, "Hey guys, I have the speak with dead spell. Maybe we could cast it on the mayor and he could just tell us who killed him." And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. That kind of stuff happens. We've all been there. I'm sure I'm not alone in this one, right? Sometimes it happens. So obviously collaborative storytelling can have its downsides too. But that's basically what the art of Dungeons and Dragons is. We're telling a story with the players and the dungeon master and the dice and our stat sheets and the rule books. But that's what it is. We are telling a story of this adventure and these characters. And so I do think that this kind of stuff all kind of like plays in. And just on a personal note, I've written a book. It didn't sell particularly well. I think it was like 20 copies or whatever, maybe 30, who knows. Mostly it was just friends and family, but that's fine. In my defense, I wrote it a long time ago when I was younger, and also the publishing company decided to sell it for something like $35 for a paperback. So, can you really blame people for not buying a $35 paperback? That's not on me. That's on the publisher. I don't know what those guys were thinking, but whatever. Again, just a little distraction. But I'm also trying to write a TV show with a friend. I don't want to go into details because I don't want to spoil anything. And who knows if this will ever actually come to fruition or not. But we've got the basic story hammered out, and now we're trying to put pen to paper and get everything really fine details, But anyway, my point is that I'm somebody who cares about storytelling and cares about, good narratives and good characters and things like that. And I've seen so much of this kind of just degeneration of our stories and myths and everything else coming out of the West. And I say the West because the last 3 years or so, I have watched a ton of Korean television and some Japanese television as well, but mostly Korean. And I'm not saying that the Koreans never make bad shows. Of course they do. They're just like everybody else, right? They have good shows, they have bad shows, whatever. But they aren't infected with this weird Hollywood mind virus where everything has to now be this paint by numbers, completely soulless, empty product, which has to be very sanitized and safe. We don't want any backlash on Twitter or whatever else we always have to be worried about. We need to hire a dozen sensitivity readers to make sure that nothing offends anyone or whatever. And you just come out with this bland corporate sludge that was written by a writer's room of 25 people instead of one or two or three people who would have had a much better story, right? But when you try to have a story written by 25 people, everybody has to have a little input and everybody's going to object to something. And so you got to strip all these little tiny pieces away. And it's just death by a thousand cuts. You can't make great art by committee. And I think that's really a lot of the problem we're having. Another great example would be this Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League game, right? This game was supposed to be a big hit. It's in the Arkham Asylum series, which were great games, by the way, right? But the first game in the series had 2 writers. The next one had 3. I can't remember what the third one had, but it had more. But by the time you get to Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League, there were 26 writers on one video game. 26. How are you supposed to make something that's great when you've got 26 people all involved, right? It's just way too many chefs in the kitchen. And, and then 13 of them were affiliated with Sweet Baby Inc., of course. So, but that's not even the issue. Sweet Baby is just a symptom of the problem. They are not the problem themselves, right? The problem is that we just have this idea lately in North America, especially, that everything has to be this corporate, sanitized, watered down garbage so that we don't offend anyone. But the truth is that a lot of great art, it has to be kind of edgy. It has to take chances and be kind of risky. And I'm not saying it has to be offensive. I'm not saying that writers don't sometimes throw stuff in there like, the group sex scene in It, a bunch of kids having sex in the sewers. Good job, Stephen King. That one you probably could have left out, just saying, a little weird. But the truth is that it is a great book. I mean, where is it? I don't know. I got it on here somewhere. Yeah, I don't even see it, and it's like that thick, so I should be able to see it. But whatever, it's on that shelf somewhere, or maybe it's down below here. But, it was a great book. So was The Stand. I'm not trying to pick on Stephen King. He's written some truly epic, amazing stuff. He's also written a lot of stuff that's so at best. But whatever. The point is, though, that you have to be willing to take chances if you want to make something great, And so many places these days just don't want to do that. A D&D related example would be the Von Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. There was a section in there basically apologizing for the fact that they have like their stand-ins for the gypsies. And, talking about how, people shouldn't be offended. This was, this was a work from a different time and people were less aware of this stuff. But you're still going to publish it, right? You're still going to make money off it. You don't have a problem with that. You have a problem, though, with Tracy Hickman and Laura Hickman creating basically stand-ins for gypsies. Somehow that was offensive. But not so offensive that we can't still profit from it. Good job, Wizards. And the thing is, it is what it is. I mean, why can't I enjoy it? Like this idea that, I can't watch anime if I'm not Japanese. I can't watch Korean television if I'm not Korean, It's just stupid. It really is. I mean, next thing you know, you're going to be saying, we can't have a Batman movie unless the lead actor's parents were murdered by criminals coming home from a movie theater. Because otherwise, he doesn't understand the true Batman experience of being an orphan. Also, if he trained and became a super ninja, that would also be great. But, now it's a little less. We can have stuntmen for that part. It's stupid. Does Superman need to be played by an actual Kryptonian next? None of it makes sense. This is what acting is supposed to be about. You put yourself in someone else's shoes. There was also a section in the Ravenloft thing where they basically said NPCs, you should always think about what would I do and then emulate that in the NPC. And I don't think that's bad advice in a lot of cases, but I want to understand the NPC and think, what would he do? I don't want the NPCs to all be reflections of me. I don't want them to all act as parts of my personality. I want them to be their own separate, distinct people. And I think this is what makes characters great and interesting. And so much of what we have right now is just the exact opposite. It's self-insert characters from talentless hacks who got into these different industries because it was a job, not because they were passionate about it, not because they loved comic books. There's tons of clips on YouTube that you can find of people talking about how, Marvel even would tell writers that they felt if you were familiar with the source material, that was a bad thing. That was like a red flag to them if you were already a fan of Thor or the Hulk or Captain America. Because then, what if we want to make changes to the character? What if we want to take liberties? We don't want somebody who's super adherent to, the comics because, this is its own separate thing. And as a result, you got people who never cared about She-Hulk, never read She-Hulk, who made an awful show called She-Hulk, And by the way, I loved the lead actress, Tatiana Maslany or whatever her name is. I can't pronounce her name. I still loved her. Don't worry. She was an Orphan Black. She plays a dozen characters in that show because they're all clones. If anybody's never seen it, it's a Canadian show, so you might not have seen it. But it was an absolutely phenomenal show. And she was a great actress. So I'm not trying to take anything away from her. But, you had people who wrote a show, who don't care about it, who don't know anything about it. And they aren't why are you writing a show then? You're not fans of She-Hulk, right? You don't know anything about the character. And then we get all these cringe dialogue between her and the Hulk where she's talking about how she's a better Hulk than the Hulk, even though she just barely became a Hulk. Because she's had to deal with way more in her life because she gets catcalled when she walks down the street, or sometimes men explain things to her when she already knows. It's well, the Hulk's mom got beat to death right in front of his eyes when he was a child, but, some construction workers whistled at you when you walked down the street. I'm sure that was just as traumatizing. Don't worry. Who am I to judge which of those experiences would be worse, right? It's just so stupid. And, the same people will then tell you that, men shouldn't tell women to smile. Okay, fair enough. But then don't tell us what to do either. Just drop all the, gender division, stuff like that. Get people who actually care about these characters to write the shows, and these things wouldn't be a problem. So I think that a lot of this does come down to basically, so there's one thing I was talking about or thinking about, I was mentioning it to one of my friends at work, and we were discussing it. A lot of it comes down to this idea of like representation, but by representation, I don't mean just like the existence of women in movies, or gay characters in movies, or black characters in movies, or Asian characters in movies. That's not what I'm talking about. That's like surface level representation. And like I said before, I actually think that's important. I think it makes shows more realistic, of assuming that they're era appropriate and stuff, right? And I think it makes the shows better. The problem is, though, that there's a mentality in Hollywood, which we've seen over and over again. This stuff was leaked from like Amazon writers. We had like that open letter to the Writers Guild of America and other stuff where people have talked about this. And there's this idea that like a character doesn't just represent that character. They have to represent an entire like community, right? So if you have a character like, say, Echo from the Marvel Echo, well, she's indigenous, and she's a woman, and she's disabled because she lost part of her leg, and she's also deaf. So, she represents all these things. And, you'll have other characters like, represent women, or represent this, or represent that, whatever, right? And this is why we can't get shows like The Wire anymore, because if you have a black guy committing crime, oh, well, you're saying that all black people are criminals? Well, no, we're just saying that character was a criminal. But because now everything has to be representing a community, you can't have a character performing like a negative or a bad light, because now that makes that community look bad. And this just kills any sort of character arc or character development. This is why we see like the rise of like the girl boss and all this kind of stuff. And these characters have to be stronger than the men and tougher and more macho and less feminine. And they just end up being terrible and unlikable characters because they always have to be right, because otherwise you're saying that women are wrong all the time? No, you can't be saying that. Oh, you're saying that she needed to be rescued by a man? We can't have that. I mean, there was a leak from Amazon where they specifically said they were not allowed to do like damsel in distress rescue narratives in any of their stories. It's like, well, oh no, actually it was Disney, because I remember thinking that the original Star Wars, A New Hope, could never happen then because they had to go rescue Princess Leia from the Death Star. It's like, look, you can have the women rescue the men too sometimes. It's fine, But if you're just saying, like, no, this is off the table, we cannot tell this kind of story anymore, then you're just handcuffing yourself into having worse and worse and worse forms of art. Why is Rey a girl boss? Why doesn't she need to train and study the way that Luke did? Why don't we have her like failing and having setbacks? Because Rey represents women. She's not a character. She's not Rey Skywalker or Palpatine or whatever, right? She represents a larger group, and therefore anything that would look bad about her represents that group in these people's minds. I mean, not in my mind, but in their mind, right? And this is why you can't have these kind of stories anymore. This is why characters, especially female characters, they aren't allowed to cry. They aren't allowed to be weak or vulnerable anymore. And, I look at characters like Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a great example. Buffy is probably my favorite show of all time. And, Buffy was a very progressive show. Joss Whedon was a very progressive writer. But Buffy came from a time when women were still allowed to be feminine. And Buffy was kind of a girl boss, right? She had attitude, she had superpowers, she was stronger and tougher than everybody else, including most vampires, unless you're talking like uber vampires like the Master or whatever, right? But I mean, for the most part, like she was stronger than Angel or Spike even. She beat both of them on different occasions, right? And so Buffy had a lot of these kind of characteristics that we would look at a character like She-Hulk or Captain Marvel these days, and you could say on the surface they have a lot of similarities. But the thing is, Buffy was still allowed to be feminine and sexy. These characters aren't. Even when they're played by attractive actresses, they aren't allowed to be feminine or sexy. They have to be tough. They have to be macho. They have to be like more masculine than the men usually. Buffy wasn't afraid to have her lose and fail at different occasions. They weren't afraid to have her like break down and cry. They weren't afraid to have her just want in her heart of heart to just be a schoolgirl who likes cute guys and wants to go to prom, but ultimately realizes that she has power and responsibility that comes with it, and that she needs to like step up and be the Slayer, right? And that was kind of one of the internal struggles that Buffy had. And these kind of things made her a much more interesting and a much better, well-rounded character compared to, what we see today. And it's because Buffy was just Buffy. She wasn't trying to represent a larger community or group. She was just a character. And then Willow could be a completely different character. And Cordelia could be a completely different character again. And each one of them could just be a separate person with their own strengths and weaknesses and flaws. But this also gave them character arcs and growth and like an actual hero's journey, which is what we don't see anymore in so much Western television stuff. And to kind of bring things back around again to the Sweet Baby Inc. type aspect, I find it really, really curious that half these same people, like, basically it's like, okay, hire our consulting firm and we will help you to like more naturally insert like women and, minorities and stuff into your video games. But then these same people, this is the best thing about Twitter or X, whatever, is that you can actually literally just go back through these people's history. And you can see the same person saying we need more women in video games and then crying when Stellar Blade gets announced, which is an upcoming Korean game starring a smoking hot Korean lead character named Eve. And then these people all start crying about it. It's like, but I thought you said you wanted more women in video games. Oh, but Eve's way too attractive. So then they start trying to body shame her for being attractive, basically. And they start saying things like, oh, it's unnatural, real women don't look like this, blah, blah, blah. And then, the Koreans are like, just like, here's an update, our game's going to be a month late, but just to keep you, in the loop and keep you tied over, here's some more gameplay footage and some cutscene footage. Oh, and a special Making of Eve video where we show ourselves scanning Korean model Shin Jae-eun to do like 3D motion capture and like body capture. They didn't use her face because they built the face in-house because they need to like be able to animate it more for like dialogue and stuff, right? But the model of Eve is literally based on Shin Jae-eun, who I will try to include photos of purely for science. Just scientific research only, of course. Not because she's attractive, of course. So, then these people start crying about that too. They're like, oh, she looks too young and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the actress is 32, or the model is 32 years old, of course. She's just, super Asian, so she looks young. And, they complain about Nier Automata with, all the hot women in there. It's not just 2B. There's also like A2 and, all the other ones, right? They complain about Bayonetta. Basically, they complain about all this stuff. And it's like, okay, but every time there's like a Korean game with a lead female, you complain. There's a Japanese game with a lead female, you complain. And yet your entire job is supposedly to promote more women and minorities in video games. And I just had the revelation one day. Maybe this is true, maybe it's not. This is just my own personal theory, right? So maybe we're getting into conspiracy land. I don't know. But it just occurred to me that, like, it's just follow the money. Like, if your job is to insert these people into video games, but it's already being done organically by other groups that you can't control because they're all in Korea and Japan, well, then why do we need you? Why should we hire your firm to come in and do this kind of consulting for us and to help us make better female characters if companies are already doing that without you? So no wonder they have to attack these studios, because their entire claim to fame, their entire raison d'etre is that this stuff isn't happening, but we're going to make it happen. And then it's like, oh, but it is happening without you. And with more likable characters that people like, instead of, Forspoken and Mary Jane from Spider-Man 2 and Aloy from the later Horizon Zero Dawn games. And the list goes on of just uglified female characters in Western video games the last few years. And I was like, maybe that's all it is. Maybe your claim to fame is that you want to do this thing, but that thing's already happening. So now you just have to attract these characters. And what's there left to attack? Well, you can't complain that, they aren't authentic. They can't complain they're not female. You can't complain they're not minorities because they're all being made by Koreans and Japanese people. You just complain that they're too attractive. Okay, so now we're just, like I said, body shaming attractive women for working out and staying fit and being models. that's where this kind of stuff leads to. And all of it, at the end of the day, is just kind of like this sludgy garbage, like I said, that has nothing to do with the creation of good stories, which is what we actually wanted at the beginning. I find it so interesting. I'll use a couple examples from Korean television, even though the Buffy example is probably a really good one that people can relate to. But like I said, I've been watching a lot of Korean stuff too. And I find that it's interesting that the Koreans have like their own kind of version of the girl boss, right? And two of the best examples I've seen was IU's character from Hotel de Luna and So Yi Ji's character from It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And I'll try to put pictures of them up as well, of course, also for science. And basically, they're kind of like the North American girl bosses. But both of these characters were awesome. And they were like really, really great characters that you rooted for. And as I watched these shows, I realized, number one, they weren't hyper masculine. They were very feminine. They dressed in dresses and they were very sexy and were very, very beautiful. And I believe IU's character in Hotel de Luna, they said she wore over 100 different costumes or 100 different outfits in 16 episodes of television. It worked out to like a costume change every 7 minutes of runtime, not even her personal screen time. So, I mean, it's just one outfit after another, right? But the thing is, they look feminine and beautiful. And then their attitude. Yes, they're kind of girl bosses at the start. But as the story progresses, you start to find out what's kind of shaped them that way. And they work to overcome it. And they aren't like some strong, independent woman who don't need no man. They both want men, you know. They like men. They're just kind of rude and abrasive sometimes because they've had rough experiences that they've gone through. But as the story progresses, you see what shaped them and made them that way, and they kind of start to grow and overcome it. You also see them triumph and fail and succeed and break down in tears and different points of the show. And this allows you to connect to those characters and empathize with them. You want them to succeed. You want them to ultimately rise above their challenges and be heroic. And of course, in both cases, that's what ultimately happens. And this is the problem, that when you have a character who can't suffer challenges because that's somehow reflecting badly on a community, who can't experience failure for the same reason, who can't be allowed to ever be weak or to break down and cry or anything else, then we can't connect emotionally with that character. We don't see any sort of heroic journey for them because they don't go on one. When your hero's journey and your character arc was realizing that you were good enough all along, that's not a character arc. That's not a journey. I mean, the whole point, you know, imagine if Luke was already good enough to beat Vader from the beginning. He just needed to believe in himself more. That's not a compelling narrative, okay? But the fact that we see him train and work at it and advance and then confront Vader and get his butt kicked, get his hand chopped off, you know, and realize I'm still not at his level. And then, you know, in the third, well, I call it the third movie because, you know, I'm old and I remember them in the proper order that they were released in. In episode 6, you know, we see him come back, and by now he's a Jedi Knight and he's, you know, advanced and he has a big fight with Vader, and this time he ends up winning, right? But like if he was good enough to beat him right from the beginning, that's not really much of a challenge. In fact, that's kind of one thing that happens in the Disney Star Wars movies is, you know, we got Finn versus, what was her name? I'm just going to call her Brienne of Tarth because she was Brienne from Game of Thrones. So we have Finn versus Brienne, but like he beats her in like the second movie and they just throw in a garbage disposal. And I mean, she ends up living, but it's like, this is your big personal nemesis. This is like the leader of the stormtroopers, and you're this like defected stormtrooper who's gone over to the rebels. And, you know, you just treat her like she's a joke. She should be, you know, this would be the ideal situation. She fights Finn the first time, she kicks his butt. She fights Finn the second time, it's a lot closer, but in the end, she wins again. And Finn has to like continue to study and improve and get better. And then the third time he has this big fight, maybe he's kind of winning at the beginning, and then she comes back and it looks bad and it looks like he's about to lose, but he finds the strength within him and he draws upon the experiences he's had and whatever, you know, learning and wisdom he's gained, and he manages to win. Boom. Character arc. There you go. Done. That was free, Disney. Too bad you already, wasted your opportunity and did those movies without consulting me first. You could have paid me a lot of money instead of Sweet Baby Inc., Anyway, that's the point though. That we need to see characters grow and change and advance as the story goes on. Unless it's a negative character arc, like say Casino, for example, where we see the characters slowly degrade and everything just gets worse and worse and worse and then all falls apart. But that's okay too. The point is we need to see the story progress. We need to see change in these characters. I personally prefer positive character arcs, and I think part of it's because negative character arcs are harder to write. But you've seen good ones of that too, right? And a good one is very satisfying as well. But the point is we need to see these kind of things in our stories in order to be able to root for these characters, connect to the characters, feel emotionally drawn to them, etc. And, I think that when your only connection to a character is, oh, there's the same skin color as me, I'm not saying that's nothing, but I think it's a very shallow connection. And that can be a good starting point. But you have to be able to connect at a deeper level with that character at some point, or else it's just only that superficial, very, very shallow thing. And so many of our stories now, they just rely on these superficial connections because people aren't writing good stories. And I don't know, I know this is kind of a rant video and it's kind of off topic, but really I find that so much of Western entertainment and media these days all seems to be on this really just, the dark times, as Obi-Wan called it, before the Empire. Anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on this. I do think the pendulum will swing back at some point. I think we're starting to see, things like this stream curator list with Sweet Baby Inc. detected. We are seeing people speak up about this. We're seeing these leaked emails and memos and stuff like that of people complaining about this stuff at Disney and Amazon and Paramount and whatnot behind the scenes. We're seeing these anonymous letters from people who are 25 and 30-year members of the Writers Guild of America just being like, hey, this crap needs to end. We are literally destroying our own, we have just movie after movie failing at the box office. We have these huge video games like Spider-Man 2 lost money, not because it didn't sell well, but because they spent $300 million making it. And I believe it made something like $500 million total, but that was including that's gross revenue. That's not including the cut to the stores and everything else. So I think overall the game made money, but the studio lost money, I believe is what happened. Because they spent $300 million making a video game. Probably because they had 20 writers or something else. I don't know how many writers they had. I didn't bother to look that one up. But you know what I'm saying? The point is, we get all these bigger and bigger and more expensive titles that should be better and better, but they tend to focus on flash and spectacle over substance. The characters are shallow. The writing is terrible. They just have cringy scenes and dialogue is awful. And as a result, I think people are just getting sick of it. And I don't know how much longer people want to just keep making giant blockbuster movies that all flop, or $300 million video games that don't turn a profit. At some point, the pendulum has to come back. And I'm not saying we should go back to not having any representation of other groups or whatever in video games and media either. Although I don't think that'll ever happen. People like me have been playing Nintendo games for over 40 years. We are not afraid to play Japanese characters and read subtitles and watch Korean television and stuff like that, as long as it's good, So I'm not too worried that the pendulum will ever go back to and we're going to be living the 1930s or something like that again, right? I don't think that ever happens. But I do think that people are starting to finally say, we've had enough of this crappy entertainment. Please start writing something good again. And hopefully, like I said, as storytellers of a sort of our own in the D&D community, and as, people who participate in different forms of entertainment, and just as somebody who likes watching entertainment or, playing video games, hopefully we will push through the dark ages here and get on to, some better times. Anyways, that's everything. I realize this was like an unscripted, unfocused rant video, but hopefully I had something in here that you'll find of value, or saying like, you know what, like I kind of like this bit, even if he did talk for way too long, but whatever. Anyways, feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I see this kind of discussion on the internet all the time, so I know I'm not alone in my thoughts that just Western storytelling and Western media in general is just on a steep decline. But I also think that it's never too late to right the ship and turn it around. We haven't hit the iceberg yet, So hopefully, and if we do, there's always life rafts, Maybe Korean life rafts, because that's what my life raft seems to be right now. But anyways, hopefully we can right the ship still, is what I'm trying to say. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.